Welcome to I'ma Talk About It. I'm Alicia E., empowerment coach and ancestral healer, and I'm here to teach you how to break generational cycles, self-advocate, and ascend to happiness without the guilt of wanting a better life for yourself. You don't have to choose the same path as those before you. You can choose a better way, your way. Because if we can each heal ourselves today, we can heal the world tomorrow together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is episode 11 of I'ma Talk About It. Today, we are going to talk about becoming an unstoppable wealth creator. So let's talk about abundance. I really am passionate about this topic, and I've had quite a few clients ask about abundance or finances, and it always becomes a super interesting conversation. So I can get into why it's really important that we begin to talk about generational wealth. We begin to talk about abundance, especially now in 2022. So for anyone who is not a part of a community of color, it's very important to realize that institutionalized wealth has always put communities of color at a disadvantage. It's made it very difficult for communities of color to receive resources, to have access to the same jobs, to be able to create the same amount of wealth. And I'm putting this very plainly because it's actually a very complicated topic to discuss, but it keeps communities of color essentially poorer or less wealthy than white communities, because white communities have more access to resources, to wealth, to everything in general. So it's very disheartening, but there's also a lot of hope as well, as long as we are willing to be able to talk about it. So I really wanted to talk about becoming an unstoppable wealth creator, because I think it's really important that now today we realize that wealth is very different. Like, there's a big shift in the world right now with the pandemic, with politics, with younger generations that are coming of age and redefining wealth. So I want to start with the definition of wealth in general. So the traditional definition, and I took this also from Oxford Dictionary, is wealth is an abundance of valuable possessions or money, or the state of being rich, material prosperity, plentiful supplies of a particular resource, right? So for centuries and centuries and centuries, we have always measured wealth based on the accumulation of something, whether it's money or cattle or people or food, whatever it is, it has always been your worth is based on an external factor. So when we limit communities to resources, it automatically puts them at a disadvantage. So what do we do now in a world that is changing so quickly, right? Like, how do we make sure that we do not repeat history and keep communities of color from receiving resources, from creating generational wealth? And how can we also change our perspective of generational wealth so that everyone after us has a better chance of stability, of living in a world and thriving and flourishing? Because when you look back on history, we've always placed an importance on buying things directly to your self-worth, right? Like, you are only as good as what you have. Like, there's never been an intrinsic way of looking at wealth until recently, when it's been quite odd that spirituality has become almost a trend. And when you start to look at spirituality in general, or the idea of looking inward, which is in some spirituality and not in others, you begin to redefine self-worth. So how can we connect that to abundance and wealth and creating a legacy and history for our family lines that does not require them to only feel joy or feel happy when they have things, right? Like how can we task ourselves with redefining generational wealth, right? Especially when you think about what's going on in 2022. We have the Great Resignation going on right now. So everybody, not everybody, a large majority of people in America are leaving their jobs, right? They're leaving their traditional views of how they're supposed to, and I'm doing air quotes so you can't see me, how they are supposed to be making money, how they are supposed to be navigating their life, right? Like there's always been a view of you need to be in a 9 to 5, you have to be in an office job, you have to sit, you have to follow the rules, you have to put your head down and work. And I've talked about this before, and yes, it was important once upon a time, and yes, it can still be important in some families. Like it is really important to maintain your job, but to what extent do we begin to shrink ourselves or not question systemic racism that goes on with saying things like keep your head down and work or stay in a 9 to 5? Like these are all defined based on institutionalized ideas around wealth and assimilation, right? Like people of color had to assimilate into these ways in order to survive in a world that was not built for them. So now we're seeing in 2022, and we'll continue to see, a shift of people leaving their jobs and realizing like, F this, I'm not going to do this anymore, right? And so you see companies really struggling with the idea of like, how do we keep these people happy? But not actually asking the people how we keep them happy. So how do you then, as a person who's leaving their job, continue to build generational wealth if we are in a time when this feeling of freedom or these ideas of freedom or rebuilding are completely new? And yes, it has happened in other generations. It's looked slightly different because of the obstacles that we're faced today with resignation, with COVID, with global warming. Like there's so many things going on that feel dire today in a completely different way. Like how do we heal the world, heal ourselves, heal our ideas of wealth, and learn to get along with each other in order to have a better future? So what you're seeing is an awakening, a shift away from materialism, because this materialism and consumerism has really done damage to our world, not just personally. Like there is a rush to collect as many things as we can in order to feel wealthy. And then you realize, or you see in movies, even people say there is no amount of money that can make me happy. And then there's someone who also says that's, like I was watching a movie recently and it was like, yeah, that's what someone wealthy says, right? Because there is also a need to have money to be able to survive. And I'm trying to remember that. Oh, that was in The Invitation, right? It's like a male presenting figure who may appear white, I'm believing, and then like a person of color talking to each other. So this idea of no longer collecting things emotionally, like carrying ancestral wounds or trauma within us, and then there's the accumulation of goods and consumerism that are ending up in the landfill that are causing a lot of damage that now we are trying to undo and trying to recycle, and the accumulation of greenhouse gases that is causing global warming. And there's all this accumulation and people are trying to get rid of it. So how do we continue to get rid of things so that we can be in a state of mind of abundance, right? There's still work to be done in order to feel that generational wealth so we can all take a collective breath and feel more at ease. We're basically making room for happiness. So I am inviting everybody, because you already see it kind of happening, start to redefine wealth. Like, think about it. I want you to redefine your idea of wealth, specifically generational wealth. Like, when you think of generational wealth, how do you define it? What comes to mind, right? What have you heard? What have you been taught about generational wealth? I know for myself, like, when I think of generational wealth, it's very tangible, which, yes, it is important, right? Like, because that is the society that we've been built on. We need to have financial stability so people can afford things. We need to have land. We need to have houses, right? Like, that's always been something. Like, communities of color have less resources, less access to jobs, less access to wealth, tax write-offs, everything, right? In this country, it pays to be wealthy. It does not pay to be less wealthy. So in order to catch up, we have to start to attain all of the things that other people who are more wealthy can have, so our family can also feel happy and healthy and full of wealth. But how can we redefine that so we are no longer relying on an institutionalized view of wealth and still maintain a sense of security and stability financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, and environmentally? How can we do that? How can we redefine wealth? I want you to pull out your journals, write this down. Like, how can I redefine wealth, specifically generational wealth, for yourself, right? Because also the traditional idea of generational wealth is very narrow-minded and generalized. When generational wealth really is specific to that family. So what may be important to me and my family is not going to be important to somebody else or be of the same need as somebody else. But then there are societal type things that you may need that come from this generalized idea of generational wealth, right? So how can we redefine wealth to make sure that us and our families are more taken care of and that other people's families are taken care of, right? How can we look at the big picture? So really looking at doing the work so everybody has a chance for success. And what that really means is equipping ourselves today with tools of better communication. Communication is how you fucking network the hell out of stuff, right? Most people can become really resourceful if they know how to communicate. And if they also know how to create an atmosphere of psychological safety. Because that makes going into these spaces where maybe you being there is radical, and then allowing the space to be held for you to have a conversation so you can get what you need, right? Or to listen or to heal. And it's not about accumulating things and not dealing with life or traumas. Because that's what the traditional view of generational wealth means. Accumulating things. No one ever talks about generational wealth means seeing a therapist, right? Or talking to someone, working through your shit. No, because it's always been extrinsic. Like, it's always been about money, land, people, places, garments. It's always been about an exchange of stuff. It's never been about an exchange of safety or emotions or thought, right? Like, that's why You also hear like artists and abstract thinkers, right? They're not the most wealthy sometimes. Like it's really hard to become wealthy that way. The people who become wealthy are the ones who have the wealth and are able to keep it because they have access to different things. And then you get the success stories of people who are just so talented that can become wealthy, right? But it's so much harder than if you start out from a different platform. And I just want to also point out that attaining wealth is not shameful. And I think this is also really important to talk about because I think that there is a collision between our traditional views, and I'm going to speak even in my own family, like keep your head down and work, but you also don't talk about wanting to be wealthy or having wealth because there's a shame that goes along with that as well. Like it's only not shameful to make money so you can survive. But there is no shame in trying to have enough wealth to take care of yourself and people after you. It only becomes shameful when that is your only means to happiness. When that becomes how you value other people and how you value yourself. Like that is when it becomes the most dangerous, right? Because that is how we keep people in their place. Then we start to see divides, right? You don't have money, you can't come into this circle, right? Like you can't be a part of this resourceful community because you can't pay to be a part of it. It's the same thing with credentials. Like when we talk about yoga instructors, like there's a ton of yoga instructors, teachers, guides who are part of communities of color that don't have credentials because there is a block to have access to the credentials that's not even made by their own culture. Right? So there's these institutionalized and systemic racism that blocks them from that access. So then they can no longer make the same amount of money as other people, mostly white people, who have access to these credentials. Right? So that's just an example of when things can become dangerous. So then you see communities of color also wanting to attain wealth, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with people wanting to attain wealth. It's what you do with that wealth and then how you value yourself and how you begin to value others, right? Because we are all in this to fucking together. And if we don't begin to have these conversations about wealth and attaining wealth, instead of carrying shame or division, how do we move forward? How do we become unstoppable wealth creators when we can't talk about it? And this even goes back to a conversation that I had a while back with my dad, where I was telling him about how, I started to ask people how much they made, right? And then you have the, baby boomers, I think, generation. There's different ideas of why you cannot talk about your pay. And in some places it is illegal to talk about your pay, but it's not illegal where we are. And I had a conversation with him about that, and he wouldn't even tell me, right? So I was like, what good are you if you are so filled with shame or fear or whatever it is? And we've had this open conversation. How do I change the trajectory of the family so they have a better relationship with money than you have? right? So these are the conversations that we need to be having. And if you have children, think about it. Like, how transparent are you about those things, right? And it's down to you to really decide about what may cause them stress, what, like, as a parent, I'm never going to tell anybody to parent. But like, how are you bringing up these topics so it becomes natural for people to talk about wealth, and why sometimes it is important to talk about it so we can begin to change? Because we can't become unstoppable creators of wealth if we don't exchange information. A lot of the work that I had done to help people get paid more, I needed numbers. I couldn't get them more pay unless they were willing to talk to each other, right? Because then they started to see that they were never alone in this, and the feelings that they had felt about alienation, discrimination, racism, genderism, like all of it were real. These issues are real. But there's so much fear and shame that goes along with having these conversations that literally block us from all of our abundance and creating wealth. So in order to become an unstoppable wealth creator, you have to be comfortable talking about wealth. That is the number one thing. And there's so many other things that we have to talk about. But today I want to talk about that. Just being able to reflect on how you value yourself around money and how you value others around money. And are you causing any harm to others based on your views? If not, hooray. If yes, pause, right? Because we cannot end up where we are now, where we have to fight, just like other generations have fought for money. Right? Because you see a lot of people just exiting their job, not giving two F's about money, which is great. But then what also is kind of scary is that the economy and the way society is built right now, you have to have a certain amount of wealth. So how do we have these conversations so people don't accidentally put themselves in a bad situation? And I'm not saying you have to go back to your 9 to 5. Don't do it if you don't want to be there. I didn't. Like, if you are more happy doing something else, do that. But I also want to make sure that people are creating enough psychological safety in the workplace so people can become wealthier and can begin to break generational cycles that have kept them from attaining wealth and valuing themselves intrinsically, right? Like, I want this relationship with wealth and money to be healthier because we have a lot of work to do, right? Like, we have to be able to help close the gap between all these groups, right? If we can't close this gap, it's only going to get bigger. So I invite you to ask yourself a few questions, and you can write these down too, because I want you to really think about this. How are you measuring your success? Really think about your success. When do you feel the most successful? When do you feel the most abundant, right? And reflect and see when it is. Is it very externally created? Like, are you only happy when you make a certain amount of money? But why do you only feel happy when you make a certain amount of money? Why is that? What is lingering in between the lines about success that may be hidden from you, right? And how are you deciding your wealth? Like, when do you become wealthy in your eyes, in your mind, in your ideas? At what stage do you become wealthy? And reflect on that. And ask yourself, what do you value? What do you value about wealth and success? What do you value about yourself? And if you have children or plan to, or are teaching them, what are you teaching them to value? Or people around you to value based on the information that you share? And is it ethical? Is it sustainable? Is it causing harm, or is it encouraging growth? And how can you change the trajectory of your family line and ensure that they are successful? And I put quotes around successful because I want you to, again, define successful. What does that look like? And it's okay if it includes wealth, right? But we have to talk about it, because we can't manifest if we don't know where we want to go. We can't hope and wish on a prayer that down the road the future will be great for our families if we don't know what great means to us. So what would it really look like? And ask yourself these two important questions, right? Can they articulate their needs? Have you equipped yourself so you are teaching people to articulate their needs? Because if you can't articulate your needs, how are you going to get your needs met, right? How are you going to become an unstoppable wealth creator if you can't articulate it? Articulate it in whatever way you express, but if you don't articulate, you stay in the same spot. So how can they ask for money, or ask for financial help, or ask for resources, or be curious to help themselves or educate themselves? Because in communities of color, we do have to put in the extra 10 miles, right? Because that is the way the economy and society is set up right now. Resources aren't readily available. They're starting to become in some areas, but you still have to work very, very hard to find them. So how can we educate ourselves and articulate our needs so it gets a little bit easier for everybody who comes after us? And how do we have difficult conversations with people to create change, right? Like, I sat in my past job talking about how I would continue to do the work that this company refused to do, not for them, but for everybody who would come after me and everybody who was here, right? Like, how do we articulate our needs? I had to make it very, very clear to them that this was a need, and it was real. It was a need of every person in that freaking building, unless they were a part of a wealthier group, right? There was a clear gap. So how can we change the future? By articulating our needs. And then a step back, how can we change the future? By learning what our needs are, right? It's all about equipping ourselves so we can be unstoppable. Because if people can learn to navigate a space without fear, without guilt, that will hold them back. And yeah, sometimes you will feel fear and you will feel guilt, but how do you continue? And just know that those are just emotions that your brain has just popped up in there, right? How do you continue to articulate your needs and be fully and 100% fucking unstoppable, right? Like, when was the last time you felt unstoppable? I want you to channel that when you think about creating your generational wealth. I know for myself that when I am gearing up to talk about finances with anybody who has messed with my finances, I know that in the back of my mind, my brain says, try me. Right? Like, that is my fuel. Like, not everybody has to have the same phrase, but that is my fuel. And I also have a phrase that my mother told me: the worst they're going to tell you is no. Right? That's the worst that's going to happen. Maybe something else will happen that's negative, right? But you'll never know unless you ask. So becoming an unstoppable wealth creator and attracting your abundance requires you to have clarity on what you want, to articulate your needs so people are clear on what you want, and then able to manifest what you want. You have to know what you want, right? It's not always about finding financial resources. Yes, that comes later. But you can't become unstoppable to begin to find these resources unless you've done the pre-work. So, I hope that this was helpful. I love talking about creating wealth, being abundant, attracting things to yourself, because it's absolutely possible. It's completely possible. I have so many stories on how wild it is that I have attracted some of the coolest things by becoming unstoppable, right? And even more recently, someone brought to me the best opportunity. And I have made it so clear my value and what I bring to the table that they said to me, I know that you are valuable and cost a lot of money. And I said, yes. Right? Like, when you start to become unstoppable, like this wind, like this fire of sitting in your self-worth and owning it, embodying it, you become this amazing wealth creator, right? People begin to take risks on you because they believe in you, and you will get what you deserve because you've put the work in to tell people what you're taking and nothing less, right? Like, it's incredible what happens when you become an unstoppable wealth creator. You don't even have to put in all of the work. I didn't even have to sit there and have a negotiation conversation. You know? Like, we ended that with, yeah, like, I have my number, you have yours. Let me know what you have, and I will let you know if it works for me. Right? That's it. Like, they knew. They knew. Because that is what I put out there. So ask yourself one last question. What are you putting out there? What are you embodying when you go into conversations about wealth, about finances, about boundaries? What energy are you putting out there? Are you worried that someone's going to be offended by the number you ask? Don't be. Just ask it. Right? And then if someone says, oh no, you're like, oh no, honey, that's my worth. Try again. Right? And that is seriousness. Right? Like, don't be ashamed to talk about wealth. It's totally fine. Completely fine. As long as you are not valuing yourself based on your wealth. That was perfectly, I don't even know the word. You know what I mean. Rewind, listen to that part, and then fast forward. But I hope that this was helpful for you, because being an unstoppable wealth creator is phenomenal. And I feel like this is part one of what I want to talk about for this phase, because it is so relevant to what's going on in the world right now. And we need to talk about it because no one's freaking talking about it, right? We're talking about school loans, which are super important too, right? And you still see people like, when you're going to pay off the full thing though, right? Yes, I love it. I love that. I love seeing that. Don't let them forget there's still the other portion to pay off, right? Unstoppable. We don't stop. We keep asking for what is ours because it is ours. So I hope that this was super helpful for you. I want to let you know that if you are wanting to become an unstoppable wealth creator, I am having a workshop on the 20th. It's open to sign up, and it's only $55.55 because it's a lucky number. It is on early bird sale right now, and it will go up to $75 and then to $95. So it's a 90-minute workshop where I'm going to go in depth about finances and help you get clarity, help you work on yourself, and then come out with a plan for success. We're going to do it together. I'm going to coach you with a community. So sign up. It is open right now. We're going to do it on the 20th. Don't wait. What's the point, right? Like, it's now or never. Let's do this thing. Let's get money. Let's attract it. Let's be abundant. And if you need extra support in holding yourself accountable, I have a program coming out in October. It's a Ascend to Happiness program. We're going to dig in even deeper. We're going to talk about abundance. You're going to have your herbalism. We're going to talk about how you can show up in these conversations, how we can get rid of institutionalized wealth, how you can create your own wealth, how to be an unstoppable fucking witch, right? It's going to be bomb as fuck. So show up. Let me know if you have questions at all. I am here to support you. I also want to share that the Facebook group is there. I'm dropping live trainings all the time. There's yoga. We just finished magical morning routines, which was fucking bomb. Still talking to that group. I love them. They're amazing. They showed up and did the work. We also have manifesting circles. There's a full moon coming up soon. And we also have community conversations, all sorts of goodness. I share tarot, all the things. So if you are looking to be a part of this amazing community, click the link in the show notes. I'll have one for the workshop and one for a Facebook group, and you can even follow me on Instagram. I'd be there all day long. So thank you again for showing up for yourself, showing up for me, and I hope you found value in this discussion. I look forward to sharing the rest of these episodes with you, and that is a freaking wrap for this episode.
Hey, if you're ready to ascend to happiness and live the life you've always wanted, join me in my Empowered Living Facebook group for socially conscious healers, witches, and spirituals, and sign up to get my free Empowered 5 Practices to Ascended Happiness guide. It's helped others expand their consciousness and soar beyond sight, sound, and imagination in just one day. It's the catalyst you need to embrace your magic and change the world. Just click the link in the show notes, and I'll see you in the group next time.